So you want to own a senior care facility, buy a building, fill it with residents, collect monthly checks. That's the plan in your head. And honestly, it's not a bad plan. America is getting older. Every year, millions of people move deeper into retirement. People are living longer than previous generations. And eventually, many of them need help. Help cooking, help dressing, help remembering, help simply getting through the day. That sounds like guaranteed demand. Guaranteed demand sounds like guaranteed money. Walk through a well-run assisted living community on a Tuesday afternoon, and it feels like one of the safest businesses in America. The dining room is full. Families are touring. Staff members know every resident by name. Someone is playing piano in the lobby. Every room seems occupied. Every resident is paying thousands of dollars every month. You watch that scene and you start doing the math. 100 residents, $5,000 a month. That's $500,000 every month. This place must be printing money. More residents, more monthly fees, more money. Simple. Hey, erase the problem. You are looking at the 1 hour of the week this business lies to you the most. Because a senior care facility can look completely full, feel completely successful, have a waiting list, and still lose money. Not occasionally, consistently. In fact, some of the largest senior care operators in America discovered that lesson the hard way. Entire companies managing hundreds of facilities have entered bankruptcy, not because people stopped getting old, not because families stopped needing care, but because the economics underneath the business broke long before the lobby stopped looking beautiful. And that's the first thing almost everyone gets wrong. They think senior care is a real estate business. After all, you're buying land, owning a building, renting rooms. That sounds like apartments. Except it isn't. Others assume it's healthcare, nurses, medication, medical equipment. That sounds like a hospital. Except it isn't that either. A senior care facility is something much stranger. It's a labor business wrapped inside a healthcare business, disguised as a hospitality business, built on top of a real estate investment. Miss any one of those layers, and the entire machine starts breaking apart. Because unlike an apartment building, your tenants cannot simply live independently. Unlike a hotel, your guests never really check out. Unlike a hospital, insurance often doesn't fully cover the cost. And unlike almost every other service business, you cannot simply reduce your expenses when demand slows down. That last detail matters a lot because it creates one of the strangest economic structures in the entire care industry. A structure that can turn empty rooms into financial disasters. A structure that can force operators to spend enormous amounts of money even when beds sit vacant. A structure that quietly determines whether the business succeeds or fails. But before we get there, we need to answer a surprisingly important question. What exactly are you opening? Because there isn't one senior care business. There are several, and each one is really a different business wearing the same cardigan. Some sell independence. Some sell safety. Some sell medical care. Some sell memory. Some charge families a few $1,000s per month. Others charge well over $10,000. Some operate more like apartment complexes. Others operate more like miniature hospitals. And choosing the wrong category doesn't just change your pricing. It changes your staffing, your regulations, your liability, your customers, your margins, and in many cases whether the business survives at all. Because before you can understand how a senior care facility makes money, you first have to understand something much more important. What exactly you're promising to the people who move in, and what that promise actually costs to keep. Every facility looks similar. The economics are completely different. Before you buy the land, before you call an architect, before you even think about filling rooms, you have to answer one question. What kind of senior care business are you actually building? Because despite what most people think, there isn't one senior care industry. There are several, and each one is really a different business wearing the same cardigan. Let's start with the lightest version. Independent living. This isn't really healthcare. It's closer to a hospitality business, designed for older adults who simply don't want the responsibility of maintaining a home anymore. Residents still cook if they want. They come and go freely. Many still drive. What they're buying isn't medical care. They're buying convenience. Prepared meals, housekeeping, transportation, security, social events. Someone else handles the maintenance while they enjoy retirement. Monthly fees typically range between $2,500 and $5,000, depending on the location and the amenities offered. Because staffing needs are relatively light, labor costs stay manageable, which usually means healthier operating margins. Move one step higher, and the business changes completely. Assisted living. This is the version most people picture. Residents are still largely independent, but they now need daily help. Getting dressed, bathing, taking medication correctly, preparing meals, moving safely around the building. The facility isn't just selling an apartment anymore. It's selling peace of mind. Monthly fees usually fall somewhere between $4,500 and $7,500. Revenue increases, but so do costs, because every additional service requires another human being somewhere behind the scenes. Now things become even more complicated. Memory care. This isn't simply assisted living with locked doors. It's one of the most labor-intensive businesses in healthcare. Residents suffering from Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia require constant supervision. Some forget where they are. Some wander. Some become anxious during the evening hours. Others no longer recognize their own families. Everything inside the building changes. Hallways become secure. Doors require controlled access. Outdoor spaces must prevent wandering without feeling like prisons. Even the lighting is carefully designed to reduce confusion and agitation. Monthly fees often range between $6,000 and $10,000. Families pay more, but operators spend dramatically more as well, because one caregiver may safely supervise far fewer residents than in traditional assisted living. Higher prices don't automatically mean higher profits. Then comes the most medically intensive category, skilled nursing. Now you're no longer operating something that resembles a residential community. You're operating something much closer to a small hospital. Licensed nurses, rehabilitation therapists, medication administration, wound care, post-surgical recovery, medical equipment, 24-hour clinical supervision. Monthly costs can easily exceed $10,000, and in many markets, substantially more. At first glance, that sounds incredibly profitable, until you realize that every additional dollar of revenue is matched by another layer of staffing requirements, medical compliance, insurance billing, and regulatory oversight. Higher revenue, higher complexity, often surprisingly similar margins. Then there's the industry's most ambitious model, the Continuing Care Retirement Community, or CCRC. This isn't one facility. It's an entire ecosystem. Independent living, assisted living, memory care, skilled nursing, all on one campus. Residents move in while they're still healthy, and as their health changes over the years, they simply move across the campus instead of leaving entirely. Some communities even charge entrance fees exceeding $250,000 before monthly payments ever begin. On paper, it sounds brilliant. Keep one customer for life. But building that promise requires enormous capital years of planning, and one of the most complicated operating models anywhere in senior housing. Now, hey race, why all of this matters. Most first-time owners compare facilities by asking a simple question. Which one charges the highest monthly fee? That's the wrong question. The better question is, which one generates the highest profit after paying for the care required to earn that fee? Because every step upward, from independent living to assisted living to memory care to skilled nursing, increases revenue. But it also increases payroll, training, insurance, regulatory inspections, and legal risk. The monthly fee may double. The workload often more than doubles. And that's where the fantasy of this business quietly begins to fall apart. Because the building itself is almost never the hardest thing to pay for. The hardest thing is earning permission to open the doors in the first place. And that's where the economics become far more expensive than most new owners ever imagine. Before you open, you've already spent millions now. Hey race, where the mental picture most people have starts to break down. You probably think the expensive part is buying the building. It isn't. At least not entirely. The expensive part is everything that has to happen before a single resident ever walks through the front door. Because unlike opening a restaurant or a retail store, you can't simply lease a building, buy some furniture, and start serving customers. Senior care begins with something far less exciting: permission. And permission is expensive. In many parts of the United States, opening certain types of senior care facilities isn't just a business decision. It's a political one. Some states require what's known as a certificate of need, a government approval process designed to answer one question: Does this community actually need another senior care facility? Notice what that means. Even if you have the money, the land, the investors, and the perfect location, the state can still decide. No, not because your business plan is bad, but because officials believe there are already enough licensed beds in the area. For first-time owners, that can mean months, sometimes well over a year spent hiring attorneys, consultants, healthcare planners, all before construction even begins. And every month you wait, interest keeps accumulating. Architects keep billing. Lawyers keep billing. Investors keep asking the same uncomfortable question. When do we actually start making money? The answer: not anytime soon. Because even in states without certificate of need laws, the regulations don't suddenly disappear. They simply change shape. Think about an ordinary apartment building. Narrow hallways, standard bedrooms, a basic fire alarm. That's nowhere near enough. Senior care buildings are designed for people who may never be able to evacuate on their own. Hallways must be wide enough for wheelchairs, sometimes stretchers. Emergency call systems connect every resident room directly to staff. Backup generators aren't optional, because losing electricity for a few hours isn't just inconvenient. It can become life-threatening. Medication refrigerators, oxygen equipment, electronic medical records, emergency lighting, life safety systems. Everything has to keep running, even during a major power outage. Then comes fire protection, commercial sprinkler systems, smoke compartments, fire-rated doors, automatic alarm monitoring, special evacuation procedures. Every one of them required, every one of them expensive. And that's before anyone starts talking about the kitchen. A senior care kitchen isn't simply preparing dinner. It may produce hundreds of meals every day. Low-sodium diets, diabetic meals, pureed foods, soft diets, all prepared under commercial food safety regulations. One mistake isn't just a bad review online. It can become a health department violation. Then every resident room needs furnishing. Not just a bed, hospital-grade beds, emergency call buttons, accessible bathrooms, slip-resistant flooring, grab bars, wheelchair clearance, medical storage, furniture designed to reduce fall injuries. Multiply that across 50, 80, or 100 rooms. The bill climbs quickly, but hey, raise the cost almost every first-time owner underestimates time. Unlike apartments, you don't open your doors with every unit already leased. Residents arrive one family at a time. One tour, one assessment, one decision, sometimes weeks apart. A 100-bed community doesn't magically open with 100 residents. It might open with 15, then 25, then 40, maybe 60. Meanwhile, the mortgage doesn't care. Insurance doesn't care. Property taxes don't care. Payroll certainly doesn't care. You're spending money as though the building were full, while earning revenue as though it were nearly empty. That's why experienced operators raise something just as important as construction money, working capital, cash reserved for surviving the first 12 to 18 months before occupancy reaches healthy levels. Without that reserve, a beautiful new facility can run out of money long before it runs out of residents willing to move in. By the time construction, licensing, professional fees, furniture, commercial kitchens, medical equipment, technology systems, marketing, and operating reserves are finally added together, even a modest assisted living community can require several $1,000,000 before opening day. Larger communities, the investment can easily climb into the tens of millions. And somehow we still haven't reached the biggest expense in the entire business. Not the building, not the land, not even the debt. Because once the doors finally open, one cost begins following you every hour of every day, whether every bed is full or completely empty. And that single cost quietly determines whether your business makes money or slowly bleeds it away. Staff, the cost that never sleeps. So far you've bought the land, built the facility, passed inspections, hired your first employees. The ribbon has been cut. Families are finally moving in. Now the business should start getting easier, right? Not even close. Because this is where the economics of senior care stop behaving like almost every other business. Picture 2 assisted living communities, each licensed for 100 residents. The first has 88 residents living inside. The second has only 46. Which one needs fewer caregivers on the overnight shift? Most people answer the one with 46 residents. That sounds logical. It's also often wrong. Because in senior care, the state doesn't simply care how many people are inside the building. It cares whether every resident can receive safe care at any moment. A fall, a stroke, a seizure, a resident wandering into another wing, a medical emergency at 3 o'clock in the morning. Those risks don't disappear just because occupancy falls, which means staffing usually has a floor, not a flexible target. A floor. That single idea explains almost everything about this business. An apartment building with empty units saves money, less maintenance, less water, less wear and tear. A hotel with fewer guests needs fewer housekeepers. A restaurant with fewer customers schedules fewer servers. Senior care doesn't work that way. Those caregivers still have to show up. Those licensed nurses still have to clock in. Someone still has to answer every emergency call. Someone still has to pass medications. Someone still has to monitor residents through the night. Whether there are 50 residents or 90, the payroll keeps coming. This is the hidden engine of the entire industry. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because labor isn't simply another expense. Labor is the business. Industry data consistently shows that wages, benefits, payroll taxes, overtime, and other direct care costs consume well over half of a facility's total revenue. In many communities, it reaches 60% or more. Think about that. Before paying the mortgage, before paying utilities, before buying food, before insurance, before making a single dollar of profit more, then half the money has already gone to payroll. And unlike almost every other cost, payroll becomes more expensive every year. Caregiving is physically exhausting, emotionally draining. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Residents don't stop needing help because it's Christmas, or Thanksgiving, or 2 in the morning. Someone still has to lift them safely, help them eat, help them shower, calm them when they're frightened, comfort them after receiving devastating medical news. The work is relentless, which is exactly why turnover is one of the industry's biggest financial leaks. Many caregivers leave within a year. Some leave within months. Not because they don't care, because the work is incredibly demanding. Every employee who resigns creates another expense. Now you're advertising a position, conducting interviews, running background checks, providing orientation, training someone new, scheduling experienced employees to supervise them, paying overtime while shifts remain uncovered. The replacement hasn't made the business better. They've simply returned you to where you were before someone quit. It's like trying to fill a bucket while someone keeps drilling new holes in the bottom. Then comes an even bigger problem. Agency staffing. Imagine 3 caregivers call in sick on the same weekend. Can you simply leave those shifts uncovered? Absolutely not. The residents are still there. The legal staffing requirements haven't changed. So management starts calling staffing agencies. And agencies know something you don't. You're desperate. An agency caregiver can easily cost 2 or even 3 times as much as one of your own employees. You aren't paying extra because they're better. You're paying extra because you have no choice. One difficult weekend becomes thousands of dollars in unexpected payroll. One difficult month can erase an entire quarter's profit. This is why experienced operators obsess over employee retention almost as much as resident occupancy. Because replacing a resident is difficult. Replacing an entire care team can destroy a business. And race the cruel irony. Families rarely notice good staffing. They expect it, but they notice poor staffing almost immediately. Call lights take longer to answer. Meals arrive late. Rooms aren't cleaned as carefully. Employees look exhausted. Word spreads. Online reviews decline. Hospital discharge planners stop recommending the facility. Tours slow down. Admissions slow down. Occupancy begins falling. Revenue drops. But remember, payroll doesn't fall with it. Now the exact thing that caused the problem starts making the problem even worse. It's a vicious cycle. And that's why operators don't lose sleep over empty rooms alone. They lose sleep over empty rooms combined with full payroll. Because in senior care, every empty bed quietly becomes more expensive than the one before it. And once occupancy starts slipping, the mathematics become brutally unforgiving. Which raises the next question. If labor barely changes, how does a senior care facility actually grow its revenue without simply building another building? The answer is surprisingly clever. And it begins with something called the strange economics of acuity, occupancy, and who actually pays. So if labor is mostly fixed, and you can't legally squeeze more residents into the building, how does a senior care facility actually make more money? The obvious answer would be fill more beds. And yes, occupancy matters. A lot. But occupancy isn't the whole story, because two residents living in identical rooms can generate completely different amounts of revenue. The difference is something operators call acuity. Think of it this way. One resident wakes up every morning, gets dressed alone, walks to breakfast, takes medication without assistance, and spends most of the afternoon playing cards with friends. Another resident needs help getting out of bed, needs assistance bathing, needs medication administered by staff, needs two caregivers every time they're transferred from a wheelchair, needs someone checking on them throughout the night. They're both occupying one room, but they are not consuming the same amount of care, which means they shouldn't be paying the same amount. This is why senior care facilities rarely rely on one flat monthly price. Instead, most build their pricing in layers. A base monthly fee covers the room, meals, housekeeping, basic supervision, and community activities. Everything beyond that costs more. Medication management, additional bathing assistance, mobility support, continence care, escort services, special dietary monitoring, memory care supervision. Each service quietly adds another charge to the monthly bill, sometimes a few $100s, sometimes several thousand. This is where many inexperienced operators make a costly mistake. They see the resident, but they fail to reassess the care. A resident who moved in needing only light assistance may require significantly more support a year later. If pricing never changes, payroll rises, workload rises, but revenue stays exactly the same. Over time, that resident quietly becomes less and less profitable. Experienced operators understand something important. They're not charging more because they want higher profits. They're charging more because the amount of labor required to care for that resident has fundamentally changed. Now, hey, race another layer most outsiders never think about. Not everyone pays the same way. In fact, the person writing the check often determines whether a room is highly profitable or barely breaking even. There are generally three major payer groups. The first, private pay. Families pay directly from savings, retirement income, or the proceeds from selling a home. This is usually the highest paying resident. The second, long-term care insurance. Policies purchased years earlier help cover part or all of the monthly cost. These residents often resemble private pay economics, at least while the benefits last. Then comes the third group, Medicaid. And this is where the business becomes dramatically more complicated. Many people assume Medicaid simply pays the bill. It does, but not always at the same rate. In many states, Medicaid reimbursement is significantly lower than what a private pay family would pay for exactly the same room. The caregiver still earns the same wage. The electricity costs the same. Insurance costs the same. Food costs the same. But revenue per resident can be dramatically lower. Now imagine a facility with 100 licensed beds. Every room is occupied. The parking lot is full. The dining room is busy. From the outside, it looks incredibly successful. But if too many residents are reimbursed at rates that barely cover the cost of care, that full building can still struggle to make money. This is one of the strangest realities in senior care. A facility can have high occupancy and low profitability at the exact same time, which means sophisticated operators don't just manage occupancy. They manage payer mix. Too many Medicaid residents, margins disappear. Too many private pay residents, and your potential customer base shrinks dramatically because fewer families can afford your community. The healthiest facilities usually operate somewhere in the middle, a carefully balanced mix that keeps occupancy strong, while generating enough revenue to support the staffing levels required by law. But hey, race another problem. That mix doesn't stay the same forever. A resident may arrive as private pay. Years later, their savings begin running out. The family sells investments, then the house. Eventually, the money is gone. The resident doesn't necessarily move. Instead, they may transition onto Medicaid. Same room, same caregivers, same building, different reimbursement. Revenue quietly falls, even though nothing inside the facility appears to have changed. And these changes happen one resident at a time. No dramatic announcement, no breaking news headline, just another small shift in the financial equation. Then another, until management realizes the margins they enjoyed 3 years ago no longer exist today. Which brings us to another hidden reality of this business. Unlike apartments or hotels, senior care doesn't really experience traditional seasonal demand. People don't wake up in June and suddenly decide, this is a great month to move into assisted living. Admissions usually happen because of something far more serious. A fall, a stroke, a hospital discharge, a dementia diagnosis, a spouse passes away, a family finally realizes they can no longer provide safe care at home. Senior care isn't driven by consumer desire. It's driven by life events. And that changes the entire rhythm of the business. Because every new admission usually begins with someone else's crisis, which also means every empty room represents more than lost revenue. It represents waiting for the next family whose life has unexpectedly changed. And sometimes, that wait is much longer than the owner's bank account can comfortably afford, the costs nobody sees until it's too late. Now, hey, race where this business becomes something entirely different. Because by this point, you already understand the building. You understand staffing. You understand occupancy. You understand payer mix. So naturally, you'd think you've uncovered most of the financial risks. Not even close. Some of the biggest expenses in senior care never appear in the lobby. They never show up during a family tour. And they almost never make it into the sales brochure. Let's start with the one that keeps owners awake at night. Liability. In most businesses, a customer slips on the floor. Maybe there's a lawsuit. Maybe the insurance company writes a check. Life moves on. Senior care doesn't have that luxury. Every resident is, by definition, vulnerable. A fall isn't just a fall. It can become a broken hip, a head injury, a hospital stay, or the beginning of a rapid physical decline. A missed medication isn't simply an employee mistake. It can become a medical emergency. A delayed response to an overnight call light can become a wrongful death lawsuit, which is why liability insurance in this industry is among the most expensive in healthcare. General liability, professional liability, abuse and neglect coverage, workers' compensation, cybersecurity insurance for electronic medical records. Every policy protects against a different disaster, and every year the premiums keep climbing. Most first-time owners focus on the obvious costs: beds, furniture, medical equipment. But those aren't the costs that usually destroy businesses. It's the invisible costs. The insurance renewal that jumps by 20%. The lawsuit that takes years to settle. The legal fees that arrive before the case even reaches a courtroom. Hey, race, another expense that's easy to underestimate. Regulatory inspections. Unlike a restaurant where inspectors may visit periodically, senior care facilities operate under constant oversight. State surveyors can arrive with little or no warning. They observe medication administration, review resident records, interview employees, inspect food preparation, watch caregivers interact with residents, evaluate infection control, review staffing documentation. Everything. Because these aren't simply buildings. They're homes for people whose safety depends on the quality of care. Most inspections end routinely. Some don't. A serious deficiency can trigger financial penalties, additional inspections, mandatory corrective action plans, or something operators fear even more: an admissions hold. Imagine owning a 100-bed facility. 5 residents move out this month. Normally, you'd replace them over the next few weeks. Now imagine regulators temporarily prohibit new admissions until deficiencies are corrected. Suddenly, 5 empty rooms become 10, then 15. Revenue falls every month. But remember what we learned earlier. Payroll barely changes. Neither does the mortgage. Neither do insurance premiums. The business begins bleeding cash. Not because residents left, but because new residents aren't allowed to arrive. And hey, race, the frightening part. A family touring your building would probably never notice. The lobby still looks beautiful. Lunch is still being served. Activities continue as scheduled. From the outside, everything appears normal. Behind the scenes, the financial damage is growing every single day. Then there's another cost almost nobody outside the industry thinks about: workers' compensation. Caregiving is physically demanding. Employees lift residents, help them transfer from beds to wheelchairs, assist with bathing, prevent falls, support people who often weigh almost as much as they do. Back injuries, shoulder injuries, repetitive strain. These aren't rare accidents. They're occupational hazards. Higher injuries mean higher insurance premiums, which means even taking care of your employees carries a growing financial cost. Now, hey, race, something fascinating. While all these expenses are rising, families expect something else to rise too: the experience. Today's residents don't compare your facility with the nursing homes of 20 years ago. They compare it with hotels, restaurants, luxury apartments, modern retirement communities. They expect restaurant-quality dining, beautiful landscaping, private rooms, movie theaters, fitness centers, coffee bars, outdoor gardens, pet-friendly policies, concierge-style service. Every improvement makes the building more attractive. Every improvement also increases operating costs. And that creates another balancing act. Spend too little, families choose your competitor. Spend too much, your margins disappear. Now let's talk about the psychology. Because the resident isn't always your customer. Very often the customer is the adult son or daughter. They're the ones scheduling the tour. They're the ones asking difficult questions. They're the ones signing the contract. They're also carrying something else. Guilt. Many families wait months, sometimes years, before making the decision to move a parent into senior care. When they finally walk through your front door, they aren't just evaluating the building. They're looking for reassurance. Did we wait too long? Will mom be happy here? Will dad be safe? Will they forgive us? Experienced operators understand this immediately. That's why the tour is carefully choreographed. The lobby is warm. Fresh cookies may be baking. Residents are encouraged to participate in visible activities. Dining rooms feel lively. Staff greet residents by name. Nothing about that experience is accidental. It's designed to answer one silent question. Can I trust these people with someone I love? Because if the answer is no, nothing else matters. Not the beautiful building, not the competitive pricing, not even the available rooms. Trust becomes the product. And once trust disappears, it is almost impossible to buy back. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. Even if you build trust, control costs, maintain occupancy, and survive inspections, can a senior care company actually succeed at massive scale? History gives us a very surprising answer. Sometimes no. Why billion-dollar operators still went bankrupt by now? You understand something most people never do. This isn't a real estate business. It isn't a healthcare business. It isn't even a hospitality business. It's all three stacked on top of each other. And that makes the economics incredibly fragile. So hey, raise the obvious question. If the demand is almost guaranteed, if America's population continues getting older, if thousands of families need senior care every single day, then why have some of the biggest companies in the industry struggled so badly? The answer is because demand alone has never guaranteed profits. Let's start with one of the industry's biggest names, Genesis Healthcare. For years, Genesis operated hundreds of skilled nursing and rehabilitation facilities across the United States. On paper, the company looked almost impossible to fail. Hundreds of buildings, thousands of employees, tens of thousands of residents, an aging population that continued growing every year. Everything looked perfect, until it didn't. When occupancy declined during the pandemic, revenue fell much faster than costs. Residents left, admissions slowed, but payroll couldn't simply disappear. Buildings still needed to operate. Nurses still needed to work. Debt still needed to be paid. Lease obligations didn't stop arriving. The company wasn't destroyed because America suddenly stopped needing senior care. It was trapped between two forces: revenue that could fall quickly and expenses that barely moved at all. Eventually, the pressure became too much. The company entered bankruptcy protection. Now look at another giant, Brookdale Senior Living. Brookdale didn't collapse, but for years it fought the exact same structural battle. Labor costs kept climbing. Competition increased. Families became more price-sensitive. Insurance reimbursement struggled to keep pace. Meanwhile, operating hundreds of communities meant every small increase in payroll, every rise in insurance premiums, every percentage point decline in occupancy was multiplied across an enormous portfolio. A problem that costs one small facility $50,000 can cost a national operator tens of millions. Scale doesn't always create safety. Sometimes it magnifies every weakness. And hey, race the fascinating part. Neither company suffered because people stopped getting old. Neither company suffered because demand disappeared. The residents were still there. The need was still there. The demographic trend never changed. The math changed. That's the lesson. Almost every failed senior care company teaches the exact same thing. The business rarely dies all at once. It dies quietly. Occupancy slips from 90% to 86%. Agency staffing increases. Insurance renews at a higher premium. A state inspection delays admissions. A few experienced caregivers resign. Another competitor opens nearby. None of those events by themselves are catastrophic. Together, they're devastating. It's death by 1,000 tiny cuts. That's what makes this industry so deceptive. Walk through the lobby and everything feels normal. Residents are eating lunch. Activities continue. Visitors smile. Employees greet families. Nothing looks broken. But the spreadsheet tells a completely different story. Margins shrink. Cash reserves disappear. Debt payments remain fixed. Suddenly, management isn't asking how to grow. They're asking how to survive. This is why sophisticated operators become obsessed with small percentages. One extra occupied bed. 1% lower staff turnover. One fewer agency shift each week. One successful inspection. One stronger online reputation. Individually, none of those seem transformational. Together, they determine whether the business earns millions or slowly slides toward insolvency. Because unlike many businesses, senior care doesn't usually fail through one dramatic disaster. It fails through slow mathematical erosion. And by the time the outside world notices, the financial damage has often been building for years. So after everything wet uncovered, let's answer the question that matters most. How much money can a senior care facility actually make? And more importantly, how quickly can all of that profit disappear? Because the final equation behind this business is much simpler than it first appears, and much more brutal. So after everything wet uncovered, let's strip away the marketing, the elegant lobby, the landscaped gardens, the smiling tour guides, the glossy brochures, and reduce this business to nothing more than mathematics. Because that's what every successful operator eventually learns to do. The engine is surprisingly simple. Monthly revenue equals occupied beds times average monthly rate. Everything else exists to protect that number. Imagine a mid-sized assisted living community. 100 licensed beds. An average monthly rate of $5,800. An occupancy rate of 90%. That produces roughly $522,000 in monthly revenue. At first glance, that sounds extraordinary. Over $500,000 every month. But now the money starts leaving. Direct care labor, nurses, caregivers, medication technicians, payroll taxes, employee benefits, typically around 60% of total revenue. Almost $313,000 disappears immediately. Now subtract food, utilities, insurance, maintenance, housekeeping, laundry, marketing, property taxes, administrative staff, software, licensing, medical supplies. Another 20% or so, roughly $104,000 gone. Now you've already spent more than $417,000 before paying the mortgage, before paying investors, before setting aside money for renovations, before earning $1 of profit. What's left around $105,000? Looks healthy until reality arrives. Now imagine occupancy falls. Not dramatically, just enough that nobody touring the building would even notice. Instead of 90 occupied beds, you have 70. Monthly revenue drops to roughly $406,000. Did payroll fall by 20%? Not even close. The overnight shift still has to be staffed. The licensed nurse is still required. The dining room still opens 3 times a day. The building still needs heat. The elevators still run. The insurance company still sends the same invoice. Suddenly, that healthy operating margin begins disappearing. Then agency staffing rises for a few weeks. A boiler fails. Workers' compensation premiums increase. A state survey requires expensive corrective actions. One by one, the profit vanishes. Nothing dramatic happened. No fire. No scandal. No fraud. Just dozens of small financial pressures compounding together. That's the reality of this business. Now let's look at the optimistic version. You've chosen the right market. Families trust your reputation. Occupancy stays above 90%. Staff turnover remains well below the industry average. Because you've invested in better wages, better scheduling, and better workplace culture. Agency staffing is rare. Memory care services increase your average revenue per resident. Hospital discharge planners consistently recommend your community. Online reviews remain excellent. Under those conditions, a well-operated mid-sized assisted living community can generate several $1,000,000 in annual revenue, with healthy operating margins that reward years of careful management and disciplined execution. It's an outstanding business, not because it grows quickly, but because it serves a need that never disappears. Now the realistic version. Occupancy slips into the mid-70s. 3 experienced caregivers resign within the same month. Agency nurses fill the schedule. Insurance renewals jump. A state inspection temporarily pauses admissions. Families delay move-in decisions because of economic uncertainty. Individually, every problem feels manageable. Together, they quietly erase your profits. The business doesn't collapse overnight. It slowly loses the ability to recover. And that's what makes senior care different from almost every other business we'd covered. A gym quietly profits when members stop showing up. A self-storage facility keeps collecting rent even when customers never visit. A parking garage doesn't care who parked yesterday. Senior care is the opposite. Every dollar of revenue depends on keeping a promise. A promise that someone vulnerable will be cared for every minute of every day. Whether it's Christmas morning or 3 o'clock on a Tuesday night. That promise is expensive. It requires people, not machines, not software, people. And people don't become cheaper because occupancy falls. That's the economic truth almost every first-time owner discovers too late. They thought they were buying a building. They were really hiring an army. An army that must show up every single day whether the beds are full or half empty. So if you do decide to own a senior care facility, remember the one thing that actually determines whether you succeed. It was never about how beautiful the lobby looked. It was never about how many families toured the building. It wasn't even about how many beds you managed to fill. It was about whether you could afford to keep your promise, long after everyone else had gone home. Because in senior care, the business isn't built on beds. It's built on the people standing beside them.